All right, welcome into UPod to Win the Game. I am Charles Robinson here with Charles McDonald, a mock draft edition on April 5 of the NFL podcast. And good way to start off since the Ravens making a little bit of news. General Manager Eric DeCosta says, yes, he would take a quarterback in the first round based on how their board is stacked because, hey, we've got quarterbacks in our top 31 picks or in our top 31 of our board. So we would conceivably take a first-round quarterback. He knows what he's saying when he says something like that. He knows everyone's going to run it through the Lamar distortion field. What does this mean? Does this mean that Lamar is on his way out? How do we view this? I think it's a good way to start the mock draft edition, though, because I do think Lamar could potentially factor in this draft. I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility that there is a team in that top 5, specifically Indianapolis at number 4, where depending on how Lamar wants to continue to approach the guaranteed money, that the Colts wouldn't look at him, And if you're the Colts and Lamar changes his view on the guaranteed money, which Jeremy Irsay said he doesn't believe in fully guaranteed contracts, and you have that 4th pick, okay, and we'll talk about who you slotted in for the Colts at 4, but do you just make that a center? If you're looking at Lamar, do you say, hey, there's a centerpiece asset, and what else would you then add to it to try and attract the Baltimore Ravens into a trade scenario?
Oh, I mean, yeah, definitely be in for it, especially looking across the division and seeing Trevor Lawrence. I would like to at least have a talent that can compete with that. The first game between Trevor and Lamar last year was crazy. I think you saw why people are excited to have both of those guys as their quarterback. But, when you look at this draft, it's like these guys are good, but Lamar is still a young prospect in his own right, and he already has success at the NFL level. I think that would be a pretty no-brainer move, because we also talked about when I said the Colts were a super, super dark horse pick to win the AFC on our long shot section the other day. If you put Lamar in that backfield with Jonathan Taylor and the offensive line starts moving back in the right direction, you'll at least be able to run the ball at probably the highest clip in the league outside of maybe like the Eagles or the Falcons. But it would just be a game changer move. So obviously you start with the 4th pick, and then you're obviously including next year's first round pick, and then maybe you can throw in another player to try to hold on to that 2025 first round pick. But I think the most realistic package at this point is kind of like a sign and trade situation like the NBA does, where Lamar signs the contract with the Ravens, and then the negotiation gets, or the draft compensation gets worked out from there. But if you're the Ravens, you can't trade him for anything less than 3 first-round picks, given his pedigree as an NFL player. So right. I guess that's where you start with the Colts, and then maybe see if you can get a mid-round pick back somewhere along the way, just to ease the loss of that draft capital.
Age, pedigree, traits. That's what I think, as you referred to, the things that make this attractive. Chris Ballard, the general manager of the Colts, is a very big traits guy when it comes to the quarterbacks he likes. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing. I can tell you he really liked Carson Wentz a lot, because Wentz had an arm, Wentz had athleticism, he Wentz had size. There was just a lot there. Well, he had height anyway. He didn't necessarily he's not like Josh Allen size, but he basically had traits that lent to him being a next generation quarterback if the mental side of it were to work out. He liked Jordan Love. Again, it was traits, his arm, some athleticism there to work with. I think there's no question that Chris Ballard would look at Lamar Jackson and say, okay, what's our other option here? Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, if Richardson's even here at 4, both pretty sizable gambles, particularly when you consider what you would be weighing this against with Lamar. And I think it would take 3 first-round picks, and I think the Colts would have to come to it would sort of have to be like the Rams, where you just come to the conclusion that, all right, we do have a very attractive 4th overall pick we can give up, and we're just going to assume the next 2 years of first-rounders are going to be late firsts anyway. So let's plan like that and hope that the Rams situation doesn't work out and Lamar has an injury, and next thing we know, we're giving up the 6th pick in the 2024-2025 draft. There will be some plan B quarterbacks still on the table if needed. I think it's sort of a break the glass situation. We're going to have to see how this draft plays out. We're going to have to see how the Jets and Packers situation plays out with Aaron Rodgers. But I do think when you talk about Lamar, when you talk about Ryan Tannehill, when you talk about maybe even Matt Stafford, if you are really desperate following this draft and somehow there was a meltdown situation and you walked away with nothing and you really feel like we need to go out there and get a quarterback, I think those are the three names that potentially factor if, let's say, Lamar doesn't move before the draft and, let's say Aaron Rodgers, that trade for some reason just completely crashes and burns. Of those three, it's pretty tiered out, right? Lamar's one. Clearly he's the A class. Stafford, even though he's got the elbow thing, he does have age, I would still put him B class based on traits. And then I would say, hey, we're just trying to get by. We need a body. We need somebody to make him do a little something. If you're the Jets, you're saying, well, Tannehill's still better than Zach Wilson at this point. Yeah. So to me, I think that's how it tiers out. But a lot of this is going to have to do with how this draft ultimately breaks down. And so we want to get into your mock. Do you want to talk a little bit first just about how you went about the mock draft? Like what was your approach putting this together?
I guess for this, I kind of did what I would do to a degree within like what I think are realistic ranges for these guys to get drafted. And, I did try to like look at it from team perspective as well, just in terms of team needs and what systems these guys are running and what quarterback prospects can fit where, or what prospects can really fit on any team. So I tried to look at it from that perspective and really like what needs were the most pressing for now and maybe even a year or two from now too. So the mock drafts are kind of hard because, or I feel like when we talk about the NFL draft and we watch these guys who are kind of highly touted fall down the board, sometimes it's not even like anything wrong with them. It's just they just didn't get picked in some of these spots. So like I remember as I was doing it, and we'll talk about this pick because I flagged it, but like I ended up with Devon Witherspoon, the cornerback from Illinois, going 25th overall, and I think he's a much better player than that. But
right.
It was just kind of how the board fell. And it's kind of interesting. Like that's the interesting part to me, like working through these exercises, which, we're going to do a few more times before the draft comes, just how easy it is for guys to just kind of slip down the board. But I do think that I got fairly realistic ranges for most of the picks that we're going to talk about here.
All right. Well, let's start off. The Carolina Panthers, number 1. You got them going with C.J. Stroud. C.J. Stroud, big betting favorite. Obviously, when the Panthers moved up to number 1, that has pulled back a little bit. Now it's, the landscape at the top of the draft has shifted a little bit. I thought it was interesting that he was such a hot betting pick at that time. I don't know if it was just because of the strength of the way he played Georgia, the way he threw at the combine, showed a level of accuracy that made, if it can be duplicated on the NFL level, was very, very attractive. But in terms of CJ being at 1, are you like, yeah, that's a hammer lock, or do you feel like there's a reason why the betting odds are sliding?
I think you can make reasonable cases for 3 quarterbacks at number 1 with CJ, Bryce, and Anthony Richardson. Like if you're really going to take a home run swing and you have some job security, I could be talked into that. I think with CJ, it makes a lot of sense for I think the offenses that we've seen Frank Reich run. I think about probably the best offense that he had post Andrew Luck was the stint with Phillip Rivers. And a lot of that was, you're looking at like intermediate routes, being able to throw 10 to 15 yards down the field, in the middle of the field. And I think that's what Stroud's really good at. And also, like Stroud's a polished passer, but I think the Georgia game shows a lot of upside that he had because he never played like that until you kind of put him on the biggest stage, and you got to see him use his legs a lot more in that game than he had really at any other point in the season besides the Northwestern game. So I think it makes a lot of I think it makes a lot of sense for Stroud, but yeah, I think it's a good fit in Frank Reich's offense and for where the Panthers are right now. But I don't think this is like a stone cold lock right now. I think there's still 3 weeks into the draft. You still got access to your options, and there's appealing characteristics for all 3 of you guys to go number 1 overall.
When I talk to guys about Stroud, I I think the reticence for some people on Stroud is just that every time for years now that they have watched Ohio State tape on Ohio State quarterbacks, they got wide receivers like Baskin Robbins got ice cream. I mean, like, it's just it's Jesus. When you sit here and you think about, okay, Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be the big stud this year, right? It's chosen next year. They got 2 first-round picks. That Marvin Harrison Jr., who might be the best out of all of this most recent run. Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. I mean, they're just cranking out these guys. So when you're looking at tape, you're sitting there and going, there's a lot of open guys that they're throwing to here. Ohio State often leads or is near the top of the NFL in terms of wide receivers being open, like how much they're open inside of a game plan when you get into those analytics. And that at times, Stroud's accuracy, the ball location when he was putting it on guys was not always pinpoint. Little here, there. But when he played against Georgia, he looked superb, looked absolutely stellar. And then again, obviously, as he's gone through the postseason stuff, has really done nothing to hurt himself at all. I mean, he probably had I don't think there's any question, he had the best passing performance of the combine. Real interesting little tidbit at his pro day. Josh McCown, they're talking about basketball, playing a game of horse, and Josh McCown says, we'll have to find a court when you're living in, I'm paraphrasing here, but this is pretty close to what he said. He basically said, when you come to Charlotte, and we'll have to find a court. Like, sort of you're like, wait, man, so is that it? Like, this is over? Like, you're talking about the dude, when he gets his house and finding a court. And I mean, it kind of felt like at that point there's a foregone conclusion. Given that David Tepper's going to be involved in this, one thing I will say about Tepper is he watched Baker Mayfield, right, play for the Panthers. Didn't like that. Watched PJ Walker. I'm talking about guys who are shorter, lesser stature, not those big, statured quarterbacks. He saw some guys come through that weren't 6'3", 6'4", 220. And remember, when he was a minority owner with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he sat there and watched Ben Roethlisberger forever and wanted a big quarterback that is sort of cut in that mold. Maybe Stroud makes more sense. Maybe regardless of what people think of Bryce Young, you have an owner who's sitting there going, I don't want a guy who's getting hurt. Like, I want a guy who's built for this position. He seems built for this position.
The Georgia game to me is just like a beacon of what he can be, because he had never really played like that up to that point. And I think there were concerns about, how does he deal with pressure? How does, what's his mobility look like? How's he throwing on the run and some of the stuff like that? And Georgia, like, they forced him to do that. I think Georgia's defenders, they showed up in a way that forced C.J. to play on his A-plus game. And then you have Marvin Harrison get hurt during that game, and he still lit them up. And that's a defense that's going to have, once again, a couple guys drafted this year. So to me, if you're like, okay, well, if that game is what he can be, and he checks off the size, he checks off the arm strength, and that's kind of like the no-brainer number 1 overall pick this year. It's just a question of like how far away is he from being that guy once we start getting into an NFL camp. But he's definitely like, I think he's got the talent that is worthy of the number 1 overall pick. It doesn't feel like, a bit inflated.
Well, it would be a boon for the Houston Texans because it would leave Bryce Young on the board for them. You have them taking him number 2 overall. Everything I hear so far in the process is that Houston really likes 2 quarterbacks, but it's not necessarily Stroud and Young. An interesting kind of suggestion I've had put to me is D'Amico Ryans came out of San Francisco, and the Brock Purdy experience and seeing a kid who went in there and obviously smaller in stature or whatever, you can say all that stuff. But one of the things that D'Amico really liked was how he saw the players around Brock Purdy respond to him. That he was just like a fired up guy. Trent Williams loved him. Like, it's just like George Kittle. It's like all these veterans. This guy's the last pick in the draft, and he walks in, and there was a very sort of culturally leadership ability about him. And I think that fits Bryce Young. So I have to wonder if that doesn't, kind of dovetail with Bryce Young potentially being there at number 2 overall. It probably doesn't hurt either that Nick Saban, he's like it's almost like a presidential campaign where he's like, right, this Drew Brees. He's saying it. If he says Drew Brees enough attached to Bryce Young, maybe he can make sure this guy goes at the very top of the draft. But What was your thinking at 2?
I think they need a quarterback in a really, really,
and he
really,
might be the best, right? He might be
yeah,
the best
and
guy.
he might be the best. I love his game. Like when I watch him play, I was just watching an Alabama game early this morning. I think he's so good, man. And what got kind of underrated maybe about this season for Bryce is that outside of like Jahmyr Gibbs, he wasn't really dealing with the usual supporting cast that we think of like an Alabama football team, especially like what we got accustomed to during the stretch where they had Tua and Mac, and they had like 4 first-round receivers, including some of the best receivers in the NFL, like Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle. So he wasn't dealing with the same level of talent, but he still produced at the same level. And, you know, I get the size concerns, but I think even for his size, like I don't know how much it hurts him as a passer. I think where you kind of get scared about that is, all right, like now you're going to be playing against the NFL defensive lines that are, you know, as fast as the receivers that you're throwing to. You might not be able to be, you know, the escape artist that you were in college. And if you're going to take more hits, then what does that end up looking like for you? That's where I get a little scared. But man, just as far as the talent goes, I think he's really accurate. Obviously, had a great command of Alabama's offense, and that's, you know, an offense where their offensive coordinator just got hired back to the NFL. So it's not like some of the things he's going to be doing in the NFL are foreign to him. And even though he has like that escape artist part to him, he does play pretty well in structure too, which is, I think, pretty important for the style of offense that the Texans are about to try and install. Like you kind of got to play to the rules a little bit in the Shanahan style offense, but that's something that Bryce can do. It's really just the weight more so than anything that gets you a little nervous.
It's been suggested to me that this was a guy who played at Alabama. It was like his normal weight, the realistic weight was like 195.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know, can you put 10 pounds on that and consistently get it to stay? Maybe, you know, but they also say, well, Alabama's strength and conditioning program is probably as good
about,
as
like, about as good as you're going to get in the whole world.
He's not coming from like, you know, a Mac college or like, you know, a Division II, you know, like this is the weight room at Alabama's better than 29, 30 NFL weight rooms, probably, easily. Maybe all of them.
Easily.
Yeah. So one little nugget I will drop here is I'll be very curious to see what Houston would do if Bryce went 1. You know, there's a chance that if Bryce goes 1, they have a decision to make on their hands, especially if they only really like 2 quarterbacks. The question then becomes, what if that second quarterback is Anthony Richardson or Will Levis? Obviously, if it's Stroud, it seems like a no-brainer position at that point. But if it's a Richardson or Levis, then it's like, are we going to do that too? Should we, you know, slide back? Do we call Indianapolis and say, hey, there's a pick between us and you? You know, might as well, if you got your guy and you know your guy is at 4, it means you will like him at 2. Come up to 2 and get it. Really very curious to see if maybe Houston might say, maybe we'll slide back to 4 and get one of those 2 guys that we like. 3, Arizona, you got Will Anderson going. And
yeah, this is only because there's no trade. I didn't take the time to hammer out any trades.
Right. But we think this is probably a trade slot, right? I mean, feels that way.
Yeah. If Arizona is not asleep at the wheel, this should be a trade spot. But in this mock draft where, you know, the current order is locked in, Will Anderson, I mean, dude, just go look at the Cardinals defensive line right now. Like you and me could go out there and get, you know, 15 snaps a game out there trying to rush the passer. They have no one out there. And I think the Cardinals roster situation is in such a dark spot right now that sometimes you just need to get on base. And I think that this would be a pretty easy selection in terms of we expect him to be good right away. This is a huge position of need for us. Let's just walk it up. And you don't have to worry about the character stuff like you do with Jalen Carter.
Right.
So.
Right. Is there a ceiling with him? Like I had one evaluator I was talking to, and he said that, like, basically he's like, look, when you lay it out and you look at the expanse of his career, it does look like there is a little bit of a ceiling there. Like he's not going to be a fine NFL player. He was like, I don't think this is going to be, especially given the size, because he's not Myles Garrett, right? He's not like this 290-pound freak edge, you know, with bend, all this different stuff. You know, he basically was like, look, I don't think it's, I he's like, I don't think it's going to be a guy who's going to have 19, 18 sacks in a season. He said, now, could he possibly be Hassan Reddick? Maybe, could it be a guy who's not quite the, monster defensive end, but he has so much speed that he's able to just beat everybody, off the snap and stack up sacks that way. Do you think, does he have maybe a little more limited ceiling than we thought as a freshman? Because his freshman year was,
yeah,
he was stupid.
The sophomore year too, I think he had like almost 40 tackles for losses, which is, ridiculous when you're looking at that level of production. But I do kind of get why people put the ceiling arguments on him, because for me it's more like athleticism more than anything else. Like, is he going to be a guy where you can turn the corner and finish that burst as a quarterback all the time in the NFL because it's just moving a little faster than it is in college? But what I say in response is, when he was at the position that he's going to play full time in the NFL, he was the best defensive player in college football, and he should have been in the Heisman ceremony over Aiden Hutchinson that last year. But this year, he had to kind of play out of position to a bit just to fill in gaps on Alabama's defense, because this was a weird Alabama team where they were talented, but not in the overwhelming kind of ways that we had accustomed to them becoming. So there's a lot of snaps where he's playing, this spot called 4-eye, which is basically where you're, on the inside shoulder of the offensive tackle, and your job is just kind of to take a beating and clean up stuff for your or hold points so your team can clean up stuff for you. He still had 10 sacks this year playing out of position. So I don't know if he's going to be, an 18, 19 sack guy, but I feel very comfortable about his floor being an 8 to 10 sack guy. Right. And I think if that's my expectation for production coming out, then yeah, it's probably worth a top 5 pick, even if with the question about the ceiling.
And one quick thing, I want to clean this up. It was his sophomore year when he had 17 and a half sacks. Yeah, it was his sophomore year when he went absolutely ballistic. That's my bad. I clearly was not as on that as I could have been. I do think the Hassan Reddick comp, though, is interesting, because you're talking about size-wise, they're very similar players. You're talking about, speed-wise, quick off the snap guys, very, very kind of similar traits. And hey, Hassan Reddick had 16 sacks last year, so
yeah,
not exactly the worst situation to be in. Indianapolis, number 4. Now, this is interesting. When I saw this mock, when it came out, it was something I wanted to talk to you about. You have Will Levis going 4 to the Colts. I just did with Matt Harmon. We went through the Colts draft, and we talked about, the kind of guy Ballard likes. You have a quarterbacks coach there. You have an offensive coordinator there. You have a head coach there that are all, they've f***ed around with a lot of RPO guys in recent history, right? They've had those guys, and the traits of the quarterbacks that they have worked with are very similar to Richardson versus Levis. Levis is not an RPO guy. Levis is not a guy who's going to get out and run. He's a pocket quarterback, which I think is interesting. So I want to talk through that disparity with you. And then also, I think it's a thing, and I'm going to keep talking about it. Levis is absolutely jacked. He is ripped up like nobody's business. And I'm telling you, when you talk to teams, they do bring that up. They're like, I've heard Brady Quinn's name a couple of times, because Brady Quinn was this guy who came in and he was just rocked. I don't know what it is about it. I think it's because you always have teams looking for comps, and they're like, you just don't see 7% body fat quarterback comps. There's not this wealth of guys out there that are basically, they look like they were just in Gold's Gym the last 3 hours when they walk in to the room. So it's interesting. He got the rifle arm, he's got the
size.
He has the size. It's just what that size looks like. It kind of weirds teams out. And I don't know why that is, but when you sit there and we ask I sat there and I ran through my mind. I'm like, who is the last uber jacked quarterback that we've seen in the NFL who has been a great player? And I'm talking just ripped. I don't know who it is. Look, Lamar's pretty jacked up, but he's not 7% body fat type guy.
Thinking maybe Jalen Hurts or something, but that's the way different than Will Levis.
Different. Very different. Right? It's true. Yeah. Isn't it weird? It's weird when you think about it. It's like there are a lot of strong guys. Russ, strong. But he's not a ripped guy. And I know it's weird to even bring this up. Most people are like, that doesn't make sense. But it does make sense when you sit there and you go, why? Why is it that these guys haven't been these guys that have had success in the league? Is it just because quarterbacks, none of them like to be jacked? They all like to have kind of semi-dad bods, like, LA Fitness bodies, I don't know what it is, but I'm just telling you with Levis, I think it's really interesting. But let's talk through you putting him at 4.
Well, this was like the one pick in the top 10 that I would not do, like myself. But I feel like it felt a little bit realistic. I just think Levis is kind of a step down from the other 3 guys. But he's a guy that like NFL people will love. I feel just from watching him. There's a lot of snaps in Will Levis's offense over the past 2 years that kind of mirrors what he'll be asked to be doing on Mondays, or not Mondays, on Sundays. It feels like a Monday. Wow. Okay. But it's Wednesday. I think when you look at Will Levis and what he's asked to do, he played for a former NFL offensive coordinator in Rich Gangrello, and he kind of got pummeled this year behind a pretty bad offensive line, playing some good defenses. So I think he's been battle tested in ways that are kind of translatable to the NFL. How he performed in those situations was kind of hit or miss, but I think when you just look at the profile for what NFL guys like and what they're looking for, he's kind of a no-brainer.
But is he the future at the position? Because I think you could argue that Richardson and I get the lack of snaps. I get the idea that Richardson is a guy that ultimately is going to have to, maybe sit a year. He needs development. There is probably a higher ceiling there, but there's definitely a lower floor too. There could be some bust potential there. To me, Richardson seems to fit what a lot of sort of where the NFL is going. The pocket guys just don't seem as sexy. I mean, look, he's got a cannon arm, but the thing is, the guys who have cannon arms now also are great athletes. Like Josh Allen, great athlete. Patrick Mahomes, great athlete. These are all guys that now it's like we want the big arm. But we also want the ability, at least the first, 4 or 5 years in your career, to do some off-script stuff, to be able to navigate a broken play and, make something out of nothing. I don't know, like Levis to me feels like, it just feels like 80s and 90s, feels like we want the guy with the huge arm and, the pocket stature. I could be wrong. I guess that's just part of my hesitation with Levis is you get this ripped up guy who looks like he's a Indianapolis Colts pick in the middle of the 1980s.
Well, my biggest concern is I don't know if you've seen like the bowl game from a couple of years ago where he's like putting mayo in his coffee. It's a red flag.
We don't even need to go there. I don't even know what that's just not even getting in the mayo coffee conversation, man. All right, number 5, Seattle Seahawks. You have Jalen Carter going there at 5. To me, it makes all the sense in the world. All the sense in the world. They need interior defensive line help. The dude is clearly, from an athlete standpoint, clearly from a dominant standpoint last year, he's the dude, right? And there's an argument to be made that he's the best player in this draft. And obviously what happened in Georgia with authorities is very concerning. That's not even factoring in the previous speed citation before this last incident where he was charged by authorities with being involved in this crash. It was not his vehicle. It was another vehicle where a Georgia staffer and a Georgia player died. Another staffer and player were injured. Also, talking to some teams in the top 10, 2 of them told me they didn't have great sit downs with him at the combine, that they felt like he was not as straight a shooter as that they hoped he would be about everything that happened. So all that said, he is what he is as a player. And you put him at 5 with Seattle. We know their history, right? I mean, they'll roll the dice, man. They'll roll the dice on some guy, John Schneider. They'll take their shot, even sometimes when there are character concerns. All I would ask you is, do you think there are echoes at all for them of like Malik McDowell? The Malik McDowell pick, who was the super duper dude, had all the traits, the athleticism, would look like he was going to be that guy. But then there was some off-field stuff that maybe they should have paid a little closer attention to.
Yeah, I get the concerns there, but like even Jalen Carter is, and I love Malik Dowell as a prospect, but Jalen Carter he's just in a different stratosphere, and I think that like even at pick five, especially with Will Anderson off the board, you're already kind of looking at like, man, are we going to pass on Jalen Carter for Tyree Wilson or Pierce Skoronsky or something like that? I don't know. That's kind of a tough conversation to have. And I think like if you're Seattle, it's worth the risk to me, because it's not, like you said, they've dealt with some strong personalities and some out there personalities and guys that maybe we wouldn't like normally outside of the structure of football, but that's been going on there for as long as Pete's been there, which is coming up on like 15 years.
Yeah.
So
yep.
I think that this will kind of be a spot where they, okay, well, we've done this before. We've got experience navigating with these players, and a chance to add someone like that to their defense would just give them a crazy amount of young talent. Like we already looked at Tariq Woolen, Jordan Hicks is a pretty solid linebacker when he's healthy. And then you can add someone like Jalen Carter next to Jermont Jones. I mean, it'd be quickly, I think, one of the best young cores of defensive players in the league, which is, that's where you're trying to build, I think, in this post-Russ world where you have the assets to take someone like Jalen Carter.
Yeah, and as you said, I mean, you brought up Jermont Jones. I mean, that's a guy they addressed the interior defensive line, but when you look at it, it looks like a position where the work's not done. There's still work to be done there.
And that's a spot where you can always have multiple guys who can play.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You want to rotate those guys, right? I mean, you look at the Eagles. Don't you want a front four where you're like, hey, we got 4 great players, but we got a couple guys who we can rotate in fresh and we'll kick your ass. I almost would be surprised if Seattle doesn't take him, because I think we hear this stuff sometimes, and then when draft night rolls around, that all kind of goes out the window because they're sitting around a table and they're like, yeah, we'll talk about the off-field stuff in a minute. Like, let's talk about him as a player, let's talk about him as an athlete. And then that ends up being like a 98% of the conversation. And then the 2%'s about character off-field stuff, at which point you usually have a coach who says, I got it. I got it, like, right? Yeah. Don't worry, man. I can take care of this. And Pete might be that guy, to be honest with you. Like, he might be the right fit for that. So,
I remember when I was at the combine, when I was asking people about the Jalen Carter stuff after it happened, I was talking to a coach, and he's like, yeah, stuff's concerning, but like, have you seen that Tennessee game? Like, yeah.
And they want to pretend like that's not the majority of the conversation, but it always is. There's no question. And you know what else too? I think there's some fear-based stuff that creeps in too, because you also have to not only assess what it would mean to take him, you have to assess what it would mean to pass on him and see him go elsewhere and realize this potential somewhere else, because then you just get killed on that forever. The only thing I could see potentially snaking this at all at 5 would be if they're in on Richardson and just not telling us, and Richardson was somehow there at 5. That's the only thing I could really see changing this. And so he
is available at 5 in this mock draft.
He is. You're right. He is available at 5 in this mock draft. I don't know that he's going to be available at 5.
Yeah,
no. I think it's probably less of a chance.
Yeah, and I guess like for the part of like what I would do, I don't know. I kind of think Seattle can make a little move in the NFC West this year, depending on what happens with the 49ers, that quarterback situation. Don't know. We don't really know what any of the 3 quarterbacks that the 49ers have will look like the next time that they kick snaps. Brock Purdy, that elbow injury was like really serious, and when they say that he's just going to walk back into being the starting quarterback when he's healthy, let's see what he looks like when he throws the ball first.
We all know it's going to end up being Darnold. We're talking about all the other 2 guys. It's going to end up being the guy that nobody's really giving a shot. It'll be freaking Kyle.
Right. Right. I mean, think about it. Sam Darnold might have the highest stock of like in those 49ers quarterbacks right now, just in terms of like what has happened to them recently.
Well, there's no doubt he's the most experienced, right? And
he had some nice games at the end of the season last year.
He had some nice games. There's no doubt he's the most experienced. And if there is ever a first read, like a guy who's really not a great second or third read, just a first read kind of quarterback, like for the coach you might want him to go to, it might actually be Kyle. Because Kyle's like, look, I'm going to tell you who the guy's going to be. Oh, just get to that read. And if that don't work. We're going to throw it away. Don't worry about second and third reads. Maybe that's exactly what Darnold needs. I do like your 6th pick. I do think this to me is you put Anthony Richardson with the Lions, and here's why I like that pick. I think if he somehow gets there to the Lions at 6, and I look at the rest of the option, like there's no Jalen Carter there. A lot of people are going to put a cornerback in that scenario. I just don't know if you're Detroit. As much as I like what Jared Goff has done there. I think they've resurrected him to a point. I just don't know when Detroit, if this trend we see with them continues, where they're going, where they're growing to, are you ever going to be in a position to take a dynamic player, number one, which Richardson could be a dynamic player, but number two, also have the luxury of not having to start him, which is exactly what I think Richardson probably needs, is to come in and not start. You can just, hey, you know what? Jared's got it. We're going to work with you. We're going to develop you. We're going to do the Patty Mahomes, Alex Smith plan, and we'll see you in 2024. It might be the best thing for Richardson, might be the best thing for Detroit. If Detroit has success next year and they make the playoffs, and all of a sudden next year they're sitting there with, oh man, we're 24th.
We're maxed out.
Yeah, we're 24th in the draft. We're never going to get another shot. Not only does Goff become an asset, which you could probably deal him to somebody else. Hell, if you could trade Carson Wentz, I'm sorry, but if you could trade Carson Wentz and get something out of him, I would probably call Washington to be like, hey, you could be giving up for guys. So
Washington might say yes to that. Like he's Jared is steady, but the problem is
solid quarterback last year.
Right. I think what you laid out perfectly, like what you're trying to avoid here if you're Detroit. This is your opportunity to really raise the roof on what is possible for this rebuild.
Absolutely.
Because let's say, like in the scenario you laid out, and just like you pass on a quarterback here, Jared plays like he did last year. You win the NFC North, lose in the divisional round, and you're just like, like we've kind of reached the max point of what we can build here, and we're kind of stuck where we were before with Stafford, with a better roster around us. I think this is your chance to get out of that, or at least take a home run swing. I think that Anthony Richardson, I think he could push for the job year one, but I think there's ways to get him on the field that don't even it wouldn't even kind of involve him being a super big time passer, kind of in the ways that the 49ers attempted to do for part of Trey Lance's rookie year before they kind of just gave it up and said,
Hurts in Philly, right? Hurts got
Hurts in Philly too. Yeah. Even Lamar in Baltimore when Flacco was there before Flacco got hurt. I get excited about this landing spot for Anthony Richardson because I think first of all, I love Dan Campbell. I think that he's kind of got this thing moving in the right direction, and he's kind of built like it almost feels like a college program a little bit, just with how he's just the vibe around it, but like they're still getting things done. And the supporting cast is quickly becoming one of the better ones in the league. At offensive line, you got Frank Ragnow, Penei Sewell, Vilata at guard, and Taylor Decker at left tackle.
Yeah.
That's a damn good offensive line. Yeah, and then you got two running backs. They just signed David Montgomery, still got DeAndre Swift. And then at wide receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown is there.
Jameson Williams gets a full
team. And then Jameson Williams, right. And St. Brown, he's already proved himself to be a guy that Detroit's going to have to extend, so he's going to be there for a long time.
And it's a deep tight end class. You could potentially address that later in the first round or maybe even the second. That's how deep the tight end class is. So I'm with you. I think the more I looked at this, when I pulled your mock up, the more and more I'm kind of actually completely on board with this, because I feel like if you're Detroit, the pick was never supposed to even be here in the first place, right? It was never supposed to be 6. You're just, it's going to be between 28 and 32. Like that's where this pick's going to end up being. So you're playing with house money already. Why not, as you said, take the home run swing? Just do it.
Why not trade up? Just if you're working in real life, not the confines of the mock draft, I think Detroit's a team that should probably look at trading up just to get into the top 4.
I really, really, really like this idea of taking the home run swing. And I think if you ask me, and the way you put it, it's all about like raising the future. It's about, what could happen moving forward. Yeah, you could take a corner. and and okay, cool. or you could just, man, roll the dice.
Roll the
Take the
dice.
quarterback. See if it, because if this works out, it's going to work out big in your favor. And
Yeah.
the cornerback, even if the cornerback works out, hey, great, you got a couple good corners there now. The defense needs pieces. It's an offensive league, man. Resolve the offense first. Resolve the future first. Lock up your dude. And if you can get a quarterback who fits the next wave, which, let's be honest, Goff, again, I think he's a very solid starter now. I think he's top 15 guy. You want to shoot for one of those top 6 guys, right? You want to shoot for where the position's going. That's why I like this.
If I'm Detroit, I'm calling Arizona and see if I can get into.
Hell yeah.
Get to 3 without giving up one of my first round picks. Like, is there something we can work out here? And then if you're Arizona, that even works out well too, because you can get some draft capital and still get a top tier defensive player that you really need. So
just tell him, tell him you send him a case of burner phones.
Yeah. And then the Raiders, they get stuck with the worst. I think this is probably like the nightmare scenario for the Raiders here, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I don't think there's any question that if Richardson goes at 6, then you're sitting there and you're probably just staring at, okay, well, it's gonna. I mean, Levis, and again, I think if he gets past Levis, if Levis gets past 7, I don't know, man. Like it's gonna be interesting to see, where that fall could be. But you have 7. You got the Raiders going with Oregon's Christian Gonzalez, which I see a lot of people mocking him to Detroit, the corner. It does feel though like a deflating.
It does.
Deflating pick.
Because the thing, if you've looked at, like, I know that you have, like, for the audience, if you looked at the Jimmy G contract, they can, if things go bad this year, they're not stuck to him.
It's a 1-year deal. It's a 1-year deal.
It functionally, it does not prevent them from taking quarterback at the top of the draft whatsoever. But in this scenario where there's no trades, for the top 4 quarterbacks have gone in the first 6 picks. So luckily, there's a lot of good defensive players left for a defense that really needs some good defensive players. Like I think you can make a case that literally at every level of their defense, they could use some major upgrades still. And here they get Christian Gonzalez, who's I think he's a pretty strong prospect as far as like man coverage skills go. Maybe there's some issues on the tackling, but it's kind of hard to find guys that size who can strap up with just about any player on the field. And if the Raiders are still going to run, a lot of single high man coverage stuff, they're going to need someone like Christian Gonzalez out there so they don't get burned. But from a what you're hoping for standpoint, this is like the worst spot that can happen to the Raiders.
Only upside I will say in this scenario is you are in the AFC West and there's a ton of quarterbacks. So anytime you draft a corner, corners kind of a premium. If you can stack up a bunch of corners, it definitely helps you. In some semblance against those. So if you can't get your big time quarterback, get an asset that tries to help and limit the rest of the big time quarterbacks you're going to keep playing. But yeah, just a total deflating pick. You got the Atlanta Falcons at 8. You got them going with Tyree Wilson. Interesting guy. Had a chance to talk to a GM about him, just about kind of like his versatility, a lot of things that you can kind of do with him. But again, another edge who I don't know that anybody sees a 15 to 20 sack guy in this edge class, but his versatility, his use against the run, it should be a really good, solid player you're getting, you would think, with him.
Yeah, he played kind of all over the place for their defense. I've watched a few games of his, and it's like, it's not consistent, but like, he's one of those guys where I wish we were able to get athletic testing on him, because he has some plays where it's just like, how's a 6'6", 270-pound guy kind of moving like that? I remember I talked to someone who said maybe he could be like a Carlos Dunlap type of player, which for Atlanta, no one has been worse as rushing the passer than the Falcons like over the past 3 years.
Carlos Dunlap in his prime was a good, solid player.
He was a good player. Yeah. Pro Bowl type defensive end. But the Falcons, I'm pretty sure I have this right. I don't think anyone has gotten sacks at a worse rate than them over the last 3 years. In fact, the Eagles had more sacks this year than the Falcons have had the past 3 combined. They had 21 last year, 18 the year before. So This is definitely a position group that needs a lot of help, that has needed help for a long time. And yeah, this is kind of like a as big of a home run swing you can take with the 8th pick. I think this is kind of what they should be trying to look at.
For him being there at 8 would probably be solid. I mean, because look, could Detroit take him at 6?
Yeah, they can take him
Possibly.
at 6.
Yeah, possibly. So I mean, maybe there is some value.
There's
at 8.
even some people talking about if the Cardinals stand pat at 3 that he could be the pick there. So
number 9, to me, it makes so much sense that it's probably there's no way in hell it happens because it just makes so much sense. But you put Northwestern offensive tackle Peter Skoronski there. The Northwestern program is run, by a coach who has NFL head coach tendencies. He's a very, very good, solid tackle. If you're the Bears, you want to do everything you can. I mean, they're clearly in on Fields. Okay. I think that we can dispel any notion that they wouldn't be. Start protecting the guy as much as you possibly can with an asset that it's like when Kenny Pickett gets taken by the Steelers. Like, you're right there. You've seen the kid nonstop. You know everything you can know about him. There's no mystery here. Makes a ton of sense. And so it's totally not going to
happen. Skoronski can start day one at like any position except for center. Right. So that seems to me exactly what the Bears need. Wouldn't have to move very far. I don't know. It makes so much sense, like you said. It's not going to happen. But like any offensive lineman that can play 4 spots is someone that the Bears desperately need to add to their roster.
And, the funny thing is, too, like, it's one of those rare moments where fan bases hate it when they see you take an offensive line asset that's not like if you take Penei Sewell, okay, Penei Sewell is like just a dominant, if you get, I'm not saying Penei Sewell's Jonathan Ogden, but like everybody, if you're going to take an offensive line, every team's like, it better be like a Jonathan Ogden type. It better be like a pancake machine. And then, when it's not, you're kind of deflated by it. But this is a pick that, the Chicago fan base, they're not dummies. They know what he is. He's been around. Like, he's a known asset in the area too. And I think they would be, that's even from an optics standpoint, I think the Bears kind of win with this pick because it's a known commodity. So number 10, the Philadelphia Eagles. You got them taking Lucas Van Ness. Interesting. Very interesting pick there. Please run me through that.
Just feel like this is kind of a home run hack for them. Brandon Graham is getting a little bit younger, and I think that Van Ness is someone who could play kind of a similar style to him, because Brandon Graham, he's someone I think as he's gotten older has gotten better at playing on the interior at times. And Van Ness, I mean, up until last year, I think he had more snaps at like lining up in the B gap than he had at defensive end. Right, so he did a lot of work all over their defensive line for Iowa. He had a really great showing at the combine. I think, there's some inconsistencies on tape, but he's also a younger player. Still has a lot of room to grow. I don't know. I think when you look at the edge rushers and defensive line, and you're looking at guys who could really boom, athleticism is a good place to start. He's got it. So yeah, I don't know. I thought this felt like a prime luxury pick for a team that doesn't really have a whole lot of needs.
Right. Well, again, this is a playing with house money kind of a pick. I like it from the standpoint of this is a guy that when you talk to teams about him, they're like, teams love versatile players. And they're like, this is another guy that can he play the edge? Yes. Can he slide inside? Yes. Does that give you different things you can do with packages on different downs? Yes, absolutely. Can he set the edge? Yes, he can set the edge. Is he a player who can get some push, from the interior? Yeah. I mean, so he checks a lot of boxes. And the Eagles, to me, make sense because when you play with house money and you're the Eagles, you keep building on the offensive and defensive lines, especially when number one, they need defensive assets. They lost a lot on defense. Number two, when you look at the offense feels pretty good right now. Okay. I could see them taking like Skoronski, like let's say he's there at 10, I could also see them still adding another a top 10 offensive line pick as well. But it makes sense sort of where you are now to keep with the fundamental building blocks. And this is a fundamental building block type of guy. So, all right. So that's your top 10. I want to throw it to the ad break now, get to our sponsors, and we'll finish this out on the other side. We're going to go a lot quicker on the final 21 picks, but
we're not going through all of them, just a few of them.
Yeah. We're just we'll zoom through them. We'll name them off, but we're only going to stop and here and there and talk about a few of these guys. You got one guy in particular near the tail end of the first round that I'm very interested in how ain't no way Bijan Robinson is going to 30. Maybe though, maybe. All right,
Maybe.
let's get to our advertisers. We'll see you on the other side. All right, coming back in. Thank you for sticking with us. We're going to go now through 11 to 31, but we're just going to highlight a few different guys. All right, so number 11, you got the Tennessee Titans taking the homegrown product, offensive lineman Darnell Wright out of Tennessee. You got the Houston Texans going with TCU wide receiver Quentin Johnston. Definitely a position of need there, no doubt about that. The Jets, 13, you got them with Ohio State offensive tackle Paris Johnson. Again, I think it's a very good fit. Need there on their offensive line. 14, you got the New England Patriots going with edge defender, Georgia edge defender, by the way, Nolan Smith. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, mainly because he's had a really interesting offseason. He's one of those players to me where I can't figure out where exactly he slots in on the NFL defense. So I just gave him the Belichick and said, hey, this is someone who's kind of made a whole defensive run with guys like that. He measured in at like 238, but he ran a 4.3. He played a lot on the edge of Georgia, but he wasn't like overly productive for them. But like you did see the traits with him on tape at times. It's just like, in the NFL, we're talking about 200. A guy is going to play like 235, like being on the edge a lot. It's
slightly
kind of
undersized.
Yeah, a little undersized for that. Especially when you're only talking about like him being, I think like 6'2.5", maybe 6'3". It's just a weird profile to try and put together. Because I remember during the season, I was talking to people, mainly other Georgia fans and people who like to watch a lot of college football during the season. It's just like, I don't really see where all the first round buzz comes in, because he was kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none type of player at Georgia. But when you run a 4.3 and, you're checking off a lot of boxes, especially as far as like character is concerned too, I think that he's probably gonna be someone that rises up pretty high. And when you look at like players that Belichick has kind of had success with recently, it's usually guys who are pretty versatile within the front seven. I think Nolan Smith can learn to be one of those guys, so I just slotted him there.
Yeah, he's the quintessential sort of, you're starting to see the NFL be a little bit more open to high level athletes. It's funny because a lot of these guys all like come out of Georgia, maybe a little bit undersized, but can move, can track down players. Like and he's like an edge guy that will run guys down. He's not, he's fast, he's athletic, he's going to be able to do that. And then you just try to figure out what you can do with him, basically, at that size in your scheme. So I do like that pick. I think it's very interesting. Number 15. This is the pick everybody's going to be very, very interested in. You have the Packers taking Ohio State's Jackson Smith-Njigba. That would certainly help Jordan Love, and it would probably piss off Aaron Rodgers because he's
now you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly. He's out of the franchise. They're going to take a first-round wide receiver.
They need one desperately. Like, I think Christian Watson's interesting. I think last year his production should honestly cause some concerns because it was like touchdown or
it was boom or bust.
It wasn't a whole lot of right. There wasn't a whole lot of in between the touchdown plays, and his touchdown rate was like it's something that's not replicable. And even if like he does turn out to be this monster receiver, they need help outside of him. So I think Jackson Smith-Njigba makes a whole lot of sense. He's like the quintessential slot receiver prospect. My buddy Bill Connolly, you can go find it on his Twitter page, but today he posted like a heat map chart of where Jackson Smith-Njigba wins, and it's just like all within 20 yards of the line of scrimmage. He's not a big downfield threat, but he's kind of like a safety valve prospect that I think would fit well with the team that's going to be introducing a young quarterback. So, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. The only concern here is not like most Ohio State receivers, he's not really fond of blocking. And I know that, in the Packers scheme that utilizes RPOs a lot, that's something that he's going to have to improve upon. But, the most important thing is the receiving skills, and he's got a ton of it.
When you talk to Brian Hartline, obviously one of the best, like, clearly producing, helping to produce, like, not only recruit, but produce insane assembly line of wide receivers. He likes this kid a lot. I mean, a lot. And I think would rank him, even with, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba might, if he's being honest, like, might be in his top 3 of all these guys are coming out, including the 2 first-round picks next year. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably number 1. But in that stable with Olave, right, you have Garrett Wilson. For Jackson Smith and Jigba to be potentially in his top 3 probably tells you something, especially when it's not the big, explosive downfield, tear the top off kind of guy. So very interesting.
Dude, it's crazy when you go back and look at what Ohio State 2 seasons ago. I think there's a chance they had 5 first-round picks at wide receiver, because you have Olave, Wilson, who already got drafted, Marvin Harrison Jr., who's going to be a top 5 pick, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who's going to be drafted this year, and then they had one more receiver whose name is escaping me, but he wore number 2 for Ohio State this past year, who also had over like 1,200 yards for them. So, man, that's a pretty good run. And even before that, you're talking about guys like Terry McLaurin, Michael Thomas. Like this is a crazy run for wide receiver talent at Ohio State. Like I really can't think of anything I've seen like it before.
Yeah, and the wide receiver that you're talking about is
Emeka Ibuka.
That's exactly it. That's right, Emeka Ibuka, and he's probably going to be a first-round pick next year, right? I think he's projected early. I mean, who knows between now and then, but I think that's.
But yeah, he's one of those guys where the profile is like, all right, you're probably next up on this. So yeah, that's crazy.
Number 16, you got the Washington Commanders taking Minnesota center John Michael Schmitz. Number 17, you got the Pittsburgh Steelers taking Oklahoma offensive tackle Anton Harrison. Number 18, you got the Detroit Lions taking Maryland cornerback Deonte Banks. Number 19, you got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is the first tight end to come off the board, by the way, taking Notre Dame tight end Michael Mayer.
Yeah, he's not a sexy pick. Yeah, but it makes sense. They have a promising guy in Cade Otton, but I don't know. The Bucs, like, they're kind of in this weird spot where it's just like, all right, you're just coming off a really successful run with Tom Brady. You're a little bit too far away to make a jump for a quarterback, especially with the teams that are competing for those spots. So I kind of think this is a good spot for them to just take whatever is close to best player available on their board that can kind of, help them look like a football team this year. I thought about Bijan Robinson here, and he makes a lot of sense too. But I just ended up going with Mayer just to give them another, kind of a dual threat weapon in terms of someone who can block and also go out there and catch passes too, because it's not like Tampa Bay's offensive line is going to be super duper strong this year. So I think that they could use a little help with buffer right there. And Mayer, he's not like the sexiest tight end prospect. He's not the fastest, but he's just a really damn good football player, man. Like in terms of getting open, kind of feeling out what defenses are doing, making tough catches. I think he's a really clean prospect, even if he didn't have the outrageous pro day like Darnell Washington did from Georgia.
Right. And I think the thing that's going to be interesting here too is it's such a good tight end class that there is a dilemma about the first one coming off the board, because teams are going to sit there and go, well, it's deep. We have a few guys we like. We can probably get another guy in a later round. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the tight end run starts a little later than people thought. 20, you got Seattle Seahawks taking Boston College wide receiver Zay Flowers. Interestingly enough, I do think Seattle potentially, from what I am hearing, people would not be completely shocked if Jackson Smith and Jigba starts to slide down the board, if that is a guy that they target with their 20th overall pick, trying to move, potentially. Like, I don't think they're going to sit there and wait for him to come to him. I wouldn't be surprised, though, maybe if they make an aggressive play, see if they can move up a couple of spots if he starts to slide. Number 21, Los Angeles Chargers taking Georgia offensive tackle Broderick Jones. 22, Baltimore Ravens taking USC wide receiver Jordan Addison. All right, 23, you got the Minnesota Vikings taking Michigan defensive line Mozzie Smith. 24, you got the Jacksonville Jaguars taking Clemson edge Miles Murphy. Number 25, this is an interesting pick. Illinois cornerback Devon Witherspoon, which a lot of people are definitely mocking him. if not in the top 10, pretty close to it. Some people like him as potentially being the first corner off the board. You got him going 25 to New York. What happened there?
I think when I was going through this, his just like he's not the biggest corner, but even though
Right.
I don't
the
really think
physical
that that's
profile, right?
it's the physical profile, but still like when you watch him play, it's not like it really hinders him that much. My buddy Ben Solak, who does fantastic work for the Ringer, he compared him to Jair Alexander, the Packers cornerback.
Pretty good comp.
Yeah, I was like, when I saw, I was like, damn, that's a good comparison. I think just in terms of uh, how they play, and it's weird because I think when you talk to draft analysts and sometimes scout too about Witherspoon, he's a guy that has a lot of hits that you don't really see cornerbacks make like on his tape, but that's not even to me the best part about his game. Like he's ridiculously good in man coverage, like about as good as Christian Gonzalez is, but he just doesn't have like the same dimensions as Gonzalez, which I think is why he went a little bit higher on this one. But I think Witherspoon has a talent to go a lot higher here. But as I was kind of doing the mock draft and looking at teams who really needed cornerbacks, I think the Vikings could have been a spot where he fell to. The Jaguars as well, but his draft slide ended, and we sorry because we were talking about it before the draft, or not before the draft, but before we record this podcast. Sometimes guys fall down the board, and it's not really anything wrong to do with them. Only one player can go at a time, and that's where we see like some of the value start to pop up at the end of the first round, where you're looking at teams like, how the hell did they get this guy? And where you felt at the end of the first round because draft's weird and the board fell that way.
Yeah, and this I do think is going to be a weird draft. I really do. I think it's going to be a terrible year for mock drafters.
Yep.
All right, moving on to 26, you got the Dallas Cowboys taking Wisconsin defensive tackle Keanu Benton. Number 27, you got the Buffalo Bills taking Alabama defensive back Brian Branch. Number 28, you got the Cincinnati Bengals taking Ohio State tackle DeJuan Jones. Number 29, you got the New Orleans Saints taking Penn State cornerback Joey Porter Jr. And then 30, this is interesting. You got the Philadelphia Eagles taking running back Bijan Robinson at number 30. Wild, because if this was only, it was maybe even like 10 years ago, this is probably a guy who goes in the top maybe
10,
5, 6,
yeah.
7, somewhere in that range. But because of how running backs are, when I look at this, I was like, come on, he's not going to make it to 30. I don't know. Maybe
I don't know. But see, I was working on
absolutely not. I can't say absolutely not.
Yeah, and I think Bijan is one of the 5 best players in the class. I think when I dropped my top 50, he was one of like the 6 elite grades that I gave out. But you start going to the draft, like where is the landing spot for him? And it's not just where's the landing spot for him, because look, I think you can make a case for like just based on talent alone, like the Texans to draft him at 12, even though they have Dameon Pierce, or even the Bears to draft him at like 9, like in terms of just like how good of a player he is. But the game's changed at corner at running back. These guys, they don't make a whole lot of money. Like even someone like Bijan Robinson getting drafted where he is would make him one of the more lucrative RB contracts in the league right now, which is kind of everything you need to know about the position. But I was going back through it, and the Commanders, like they could use someone like him, but even they have Brian Robinson. There's the problem with Bijan, and I guess was kind of unlucky for him, is there's just a lot of good running backs in the NFL right now. And as special a player as he is, it kind of is going to devalue him on draft day. But I mean, if he fell to the Eagles, like I think that's one of those picks where it'd be like, oh, what the hell did we let this guy fall all the way to 30?
Right.
Because you talk about, like, I'm excited about what Rashad Penny can do in this offense, let alone someone like Bijan Robinson. So I think this would be a kind of a dream fit for him. I'm sure he would probably rather go at 10 than 30, but still, like, this is kind of this is kind of like the premier fit for running backs just across the whole league.
I'd lose my Buffalo didn't take him at 27. Like if he starts sliding like this, I just, because to me, I'm like, that's the guy that you put behind Josh for. I mean, you just lock him in for 5. You're like, we got this guy behind Josh for 5 years, and we'll see. It's going to be interesting. He's a huge mystery when you just make calls, talk to teams, and they're like, I don't know. Like he could go higher than you think, and maybe you're a little surprised. He could go lower than you think, maybe you're a little surprised. It's all just because people are running back so funky now, and the value system of the NFL is so like.
And this changed really fast because what year did Saquon Barkley get drafted?
Yeah, but I mean that was
and we had
4
Zeke
years,
and Christian McCaffrey,
right? For 4 years ago, Saquon, right?
Right, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, how fast does this all change? Because even before Saquon, there's Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette. It's not like they were allergic to taking guys this high, but
right.
I think that's really changed in the past like 3 years. And just look at what these guys are getting paid. I would be a little surprised if Bijan went that high.
I think though part of it is those guys you just mentioned. What's a common thread with all of them? Either injury or they wore down quickly. Like, Zeke wore down really quickly. He had punch coming out, and then it just felt like it tailed off after the first couple of years. McCaffrey was hurt. Obviously Saquon was constantly hurt. So I think that's just part of it. And then you see the, Texans get Dameon Pierce, right? And you're like, you see what Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker can do. And you're like, why the hell? Like, they just sat forever. Like, how did they end up, getting to these teams so late in the draft? I mean, obviously second round, but still they were both insanely productive college players. Got Kansas City closing it out. Obviously Miami doesn't have a pick. They got forfeited because of the tampering.
Losers.
Yeah. The Kansas City Chiefs take LSU edge, BJ Ojulari. I like that. They definitely need edge. They need edge. They need rush. That to me makes a ton of sense. So that's it. 31 picks, long show. Anytime we do a mock like that, it's going to be. That's why we can't talk about every pick. It would be like a freaking 4-hour show, which is
and by at some point you'll be sitting here by yourself doing it because I'll tap out.
Like I don't even care about my mocks that much. So
I don't care about my own mock that much.
All right. Well, that's it. It was a pretty light news cycle this time around, so figured it was good to get this out of the way. Charles and I are both working on the All Juice team as well, so that rollout is going to be forthcoming in the next couple of weeks, so be prepared for that. But other than that, we'll be back on Monday. Look forward to that. You can get CMAC on Twitter at 4verts. You can get myself at Charles Robinson. You can get our ace producer, Stone Rochelle, at SJ Rochelle. And as always, since we talked about the All Juice team, it's applicable here. Help us keep Terez Paylor's legacy alive. Visit breakingtea.com/Terez for the All Juice tier hoodie. Remember that proceeds for that go to support the Terez A. Paylor Scholarship at Howard University. You can donate directly to that scholarship as well as the one in his name at Power Mizzou if you check out our podcast description. And if you could support our network, check out our new NBA podcast, Ball Don't Lie, featuring Vinny Goodwill, Jake Fisher, and Dan Devine, as well as our new MLB podcast, Bandwagon, featuring Hannah Kaiser and Zach Kreiser, both available wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, help us grow the family. We will see you on Monday. Peace.